calling from Singapore, and she is helping us organize the virtual event. So maybe she can share a couple of points, opinions from her side. Now, from what I understand, we have 20 minutes. It's 2 o'clock now, so the session's supposed to start, and I'll just wait until the next host appears and just keep on talking. We can carry on the discussion in terms of how you guys perceive wisdom and how do you think it can be accelerated, especially in the case of Munir, because he is working with governments. It's actually super interesting to know what governments think that they should be doing about that. It's very different from what they're capable of doing, and is also very different from doing the right thing, right? Because one of the easiest definitions of wisdom, and I've been fascinated with the topic for a very long time, is that a wise person does the right thing for the right reasons at the right time, whatever that means. So it's a very personal definition. You're always making, thousands, if not millions of choices every day of your life. And those choices have minor or major consequences. So the people that we consider to be wise are those that to do certain things, I go, wow, no, it was right in front of me and I could not see it. And how they manage to achieve this kind of wisdom where you go like, well, this is super simple. It could be via the use of a framework, like one of the oldest, in fact, is several hundred years old. It's called the Occam's razor. That most likely explanation for a specific situation or event tends to be the simplest. So conspiracy theories are very funny, no, both in the haha and in the perspective. I think mainly the this is kind of funny, because people try to over rationalize, like, and they look for patterns, and the human brain is really good at seeing faces and little fluffy sheep on the sky, and they create this echo chamber, especially with the internet, where one message reinforces the other. So if you have a bunch of conspiracy theorists in a room and there's no one there saying, let's look at things from a different perspective, they just keep on repeating the same words, they will eventually find a pattern that makes sense with aliens or 5G, or implanting microchips with vaccination. And I will not delve into that specific topic because some people are very sensitive, especially with the 5G topic. But my family has been in telecommunications for 100 years, and I just fail to comprehend what the issue. But the wisdom elements tends to be very much related to not only having access to knowledge, but what you do with that knowledge. So you have people who are extremely experienced, they're very intelligent, but they're not wise. They never really managed to get this wealth of knowledge and the interactions they had in their lives in the past, and reflect so that this becomes an insight. And very few people know that the the symbol for justice is a blind woman, right? So in fact, this is something you see in statues everywhere. It's actually the same symbol for the goddess of Fortuna. So the Fortuna being the goddess of luck and fate. And you have the wheel of fortune, in which sometimes you're at the top and then you have control over the situation, whatever that means. Sometimes the wheel turns and you get crushed by the wheel. And because she is a blind goddess, you don't really know when it's going to happen, which is why you say that fate is something that is very much outside of control. The goddess of wisdom, at least one of the representations, because you have a couple of different possibilities there, is called Sapientia. And it's in fact a woman looking at a mirror. And I've never seen any statues, any paintings of that specific incarnation of wisdom, but it's very powerful in the sense that it's not what the world gives you, it's how you reflect upon it. Like, what are the consequences of the things that are happening around you? How can you become more empowered, even especially in a situation like that when you have a pandemic, your freedoms are being taken away from you for reasons that you cannot comprehend. It all happens very fast. But if you look at yourself in a mirror and the things that are happening to you, and you try to look from a detached perspective, like you're a third person looking at yourself at reflection, how can you benefit from that specific moment, in this case, a crisis, and to become a better person, whatever that means, again, to you from this crisis. I mean, some people say never waste a crisis, right? So if you're getting into suffering and I'll have to mute because of the different sounds, but please uh, unmute yourselves if you want to talk. So basically, you end up in a situation where lots of things are happening to you, and you want to make sure that you don't see those things only from your own perspective. You try to imagine yourself as someone outside, and how would you recommend that you would behave if you were someone else? And this is a very, very powerful tool that you can use. It's a well-known and well-studied phenomenon that was first described curiously with King Solomon. And you know, it's a kind of Christian topic, but it's well-known in most cultures. That King Solomon had a story where he was a wise king. Two women claimed to be the mother of a baby, and then he solved the problem by threatening to cut the baby in half and then giving half to each woman. And then the real mother said, no, give the baby to the other woman. And that was the real mother, the one who was willing to sacrifice herself to save the life of the baby. But even though many people know the story, not so many people know that King Solomon was considered to be very unwise in his own personal life, not getting into biblical studies, not even something that I'll be very familiar with. But it is very common that people who are wise, when recommending a solution for others and advising friends or in a public function, they say the right things at the right time and they do the right things, they don't apply that to themselves. So you have the element of personal wisdom and public wisdom. That's one of the ways of describing it. And of course, you want to have both. And to loop back into the situation with teenagers, what tends to happen is before the internet became such a massive deal, you had certain channels of knowledge that were accessible to teens, 13 to 17, of course, before. And those tended to be what you learned at school, what you're learning from your peers and friends at school or around school, and what you're learning from your parents and family. And all of a sudden, and of course, television and media, right? So, which was also a curated control channel, and it didn't have many options. I mean, I grew up with 7 TV channels in the 70s. And what happens now is that we have this huge flood of information for free, because in fact you're paying with our data. When you go to YouTube, they're selling us ads, or they're selling other details of our behavior that tends to be valuable to companies. That's a completely different topic. But the consequence is you have the whole knowledge that has ever been created in one way or another available to teenagers. Of course, commercial secrets and what happens in a boardroom, those things are not available, but you do have a certain level of data that is being given for free, and they just have to go there and figure out how they're going to be defining their knowledge base. Now, a lot of this is being defined by algorithms. Like if you like pop music, you're just going to get lots of pop music. So you end up in a situation where there's huge echo chamber, a little bit like with the conspiracy theories, where you only hear the things that are looping back to the things that you heard before, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper in this kind of rabbit hole. And that's very unlikely to be a way to get people into a position of wisdom. If you're being flooded with information that activates dopamine in the brain, and you just like listening pop music or playing video games, whatever it is, you'll tend to stay there, right? And there is a huge server farm of computers that specialize on making sure that you never leave, because that makes you like a sheep. Like you're easier to understand, you're easier to herd into clusters that marketeers can then sell stuff to. And that's taking us away from the possibility of becoming wiser, because wisdom tends to come from learning a huge number of topics at a certain level of detail that allows you to decide if it's something that you want to learn more about or not. And all of a sudden, the uh, kind of pernicious nature is that this information is out there, but we have computer algorithms that prevent us from reaching that. It's kind of within touch. It's almost the same situation where the wise person tells you, why don't you do A or B? You go, wow, this was right in front of me and I could not see it. So starting from the principle that if you're already in your 20s, your brain has been kind of modulated by certain preferences, by growing up on a location with a certain culture, going to a certain school, and you're more concerned in terms of how to specialize to pay your bills. And you want to get into the job market, meaning that you're going even further away from this polymathic curiosity that children have. I thought that if we are in a position to get the teenager group, which is still a blank slate in terms of what they're going to be, they still have so much doubt, they're still trying to figure out what is going to happen with them in the future, and what is sort of their mission and purpose in life. And if we gave this group, the ones that show an interest in expressing their curiosity, to join a community of other teenagers that have the same sort of spirit, and we gave them like a buffet restaurant for the mind, a little bit of an introduction to specific topics or professions from experts in the field. There's nothing new there. It's just the fact that now is easier to reach teenagers from around the world to do this. All of a sudden, you're making those teenagers wiser, because not only they have access to a curated almost channel of an experience that comes from experts that can talk about their past, so what they are doing in the beginning of their careers and how they reach the current level of expertise that gets them to be recognized as speakers worldwide, and what they're doing right now. Are they happy with this? And what are the consequences of the choices in the past? So you can sort of accelerate your wisdom from the perspective of learning from a specialist that went through a similar path, and what they're planning to do in the future. And above all, getting those experts in specific fields to tell to the group of teenagers, if they were in that age range, 13 to 17 today, what would they be interested in learning? What kind of careers would they be considering? So the teenagers are becoming wiser based on the experience, and therefore reflecting on the lessons learned from people that managed to reach a certain level of knowledge that got them invited to join such a program. So usually we invite people who are fairly well-known speakers. They went to conferences, or they have been in certain media channels. They have published a book. They have positions of, let's say, intrinsic power from an influence perspective. So they're professors, or they educators in some other way. And because they're willing to come and talk to the teenagers without making any money of it. I mean, we're a nonprofit. They're self-filtering, right? We know that people who are very busy and say, okay, I want to spend half an hour making teenagers wiser, they come from a good place. Like they're doing that from the heart, because there's really nothing else for them other than the enjoyment of helping the future generations. So I came up with this idea based on a personal experience. So there are actually three main elements that converged into the whole Wisdom Accelerator project. The first one is that I've been going to Davos during the World Economic Forum for almost 10 years. So I know it really well. I know how it works. I know lots of people. So it's easy for me to ask specialists in specific, different fields to come and join as the speakers. The other element is that I've been involved in the cryptocurrency and blockchain world from a very early days, like 2013. And I created a community with two co-founders called Crypto Explorers in 2017, which is more or less the same. Like we would get people passionate about blockchain technologies to fly to Switzerland, to Singapore, to some other places in groups of up to 40 individuals. And we spend 2, 3, 4 days discussing this decentralization and what's going to happen, and hearing more from speakers based in those locations. And that was adapted to teenagers. So the group size now is maximum 20 when they're spending time together, and they spend a whole week so they can make friends for life. And the uh, whole idea of really sharing this magic is because my daughter being a teenager and learning so much from traveling around the world and going to interesting places and doing really quite amazing things in her life, such as speaking in conferences about blockchain and children in front of 500 people. She was moderating a session at the World Trade Organization on blockchain and trade when she was 15 years old, which is kind of insane when you think that people in the audience were, in some cases, 5 times older than her. You had delegates who were 75 years old. And you have this tiny teenager showing up, and all of a sudden she's a moderator. So she learned so much from that kind of experience, and lots of other things. Like one day I was asking her, what do you want to do when you grow up? And she told me she liked particle physics. And the day after, she had a job at CERN in Geneva. Right? She did a traineeship there for 1 week. And all that it took, because I have friends at CERN, they happened to have a program for teenagers. She had to do this 1 week traineeship as a school program. I just had to ask. And then I took her there because I was going to Geneva anyway to speak at the United Nations during a conference. So the level of effort that it took between my teenage daughter expressing the intention, like liking particle physics, to being able to spend a week at CERN, which she did a couple of months later, it was literally just a matter of asking, right? And I think that many teenagers in the world, and myself included, when I was 15, I told a friend of mine that I really liked artificial intelligence. And this is literally 35 years ago. So it was very, very early days. His reaction, or he was always almost the same age, like I think 15 or so. He just said, yeah, but you need to be really good at math, and you're not. So he obviously, being a teenager, he couldn't do any better, but just imagine if you're in a situation where a person like that hears this expressed intention and says, well, if you want to learn more about artificial intelligence, you need to be really good at math. You're not to the top of a class, but maybe there are other ways that you can participate in the industry. Maybe you can do business development. Maybe you can be a trainee in a company. Maybe you should just go to a library and get some more books to learn about this. So this kind of motivation that I didn't have as a teenager, and I think that most teenagers do not get, because most parents just simply do not know what to do with these kind of intentions. My daughter got, and her life is much better for it. So the concept of wisdom acceleration is to get those teenagers to join as a global community, spending preferably a week together. We've done that twice in Davos, and the feedback was very, very positive. They should be half boys, half girls. They should be from a wide range of ages, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, not only clustering towards the lower of higher ends. And they should get a huge amount of influencers who are very successful at what they're doing. And all of a sudden, you're going to find a spark where maybe the speaker talking about blockchain is going to create a fire inside one of the teenagers, and they are going to figure out who else in the community likes blockchain. And they're going to reach out to me and to the other students and to the speakers. Where can I learn more about this? And everything is curated. It's not like you're going to a YouTube video and then you have zero access other than posting a comment and hoping that maybe you're going to get an answer. And most teenagers would not even consider doing that, because I feel like, oh, here's a 50-year-old guy who's been doing this for 30 years. I'm just a teenager, I know nothing. I'm not going to bother this expert. And you don't have a direct connection because the generational gap is too broad. But the same teenager will be totally fine talking to the buddy that spent a week together having fun in the snow. And they'll be discussing how as teenagers they can develop those conversations and reach out to have more resources and then get stuff done. Now, I also try to get speakers who are in the lower brackets in terms of 20-year-olds who are World Economic Forum global shapers or the Forbes 30 under 30 in the different countries, so that the generational gap is no longer an issue. It's a lot easier for a 17-year-old to talk to a 20-year-old who is already working and being recognized for his or her work. So you have the element of most teenagers today have parents who are between 40 and 50. So if you want to have the full range, the full scope of learned lessons being available to them, you want to focus on getting them in touch and having mentors who are between 20 and 30 and mentors who are 60 and 70, right? And this is very complementary. This allows them to have a full perspective of where life is going to be the most rewarding to them based on the current level of interest, and then further developing those interests or not. Maybe they just want to know more about particle physics in the case of my daughter, and then 6 months later she's on to something else. But she did have the experience to spend a week at CERN, to meet amazing, super smart people, and to understand that this was not something for her. So the lessons learned from Davos is basically this just works. Like the teenagers absolutely adored the structure. I invite you to have a look at the website to see how we do it. Basically every morning they're doing something as fun. So they're building igloos, they're learning how to snowshoe walk, and then find shelter during a snowstorm, how to rescue someone from an avalanche, cross-country skiing, sledging, and all sorts of things. And every afternoon, because they had so much fun in the morning, they already bond as a group much faster than usual. So in the afternoon, you have all the speakers who are coming and joining, and they can have this interaction, which it feels so much more real than a YouTube video with some celebrity, because that person is 3 meters away from you. And you can have a conversation. Sometimes they get the business card, and they can start some sort of informal mentorship, which we want to make more formal. But the lesson learned that was most powerful, I would say, and it's really interesting that Inek is here. Maybe can ask her a little bit more about that, because her son was with us last January, and the unintended consequences, let's say, the most powerful element. So 2 of the alumni from the first edition decided to run a conference in Shanghai. So one of them was based in London, was 17 years old. The other one, I believe, was 15 or 16. And the London boy was already for a few years organizing small conferences there and around the world for teenager entrepreneurs. And the girl from Shanghai, her mother organizes very big conferences. So without telling me, without even asking for help or needing any help, they decided to run a conference in Shanghai, the 2 of them, and they had, I believe, almost 100 people. So teenagers connecting, having this very strong bond that comes from spending a week together in the same place, learning so much, having so much fun, and really getting to know one another in a non-judgmental space. They just started an initiative that hopefully they can do again in the future. And in the case of Ineke's son, Sanyan, he was this year in Davos with another alumnus from Shenzhen. And her name is Jessica. I don't think that she joined us today, but she started a company, selling bubble tea, and they're already discussing, and I hope that it's not confidential, the idea that he could be the franchise holder in Singapore and maybe even in other countries. And they're both 15 years old. So you have a teenager who's highly entrepreneurial. She started a company. She has her community of teenage entrepreneurs in China as well. And this is kind of how they end up in my program, right? They've done something that made them so remarkable to someone who knows me that they get referred. And all of a sudden start getting teenagers who have this ability to do more with their lives than most people have at that age, which is certainly my case. And when you put them together, magic happens, right? And if the bubble tea thing is going to happen or not, it's almost irrelevant at this point. The fact that they discuss this opportunity and they assess if it's worth doing or not is already very, very powerful, because it gets them into the right mindset. So the big lesson learned is get bright, highly motivated teenagers in the same place for a few days, make sure that it's designed to be the best week of their lives, and magic happens. So we have still 5 minutes. I guess we can leave that to additional questions, or maybe Ineke can join us and explain a little bit your perspective as a mother of one of the participants, and then have a few questions. So whatever you prefer to do now.
Sure, I can spend like a minute or two introducing myself and our experience with the way. So hi everyone, my name is Ineke. I live in Singapore, and like Marcelo said, my son, a 15-year-old San Yen, went to Davos earlier this year to join the Way program. He came back and told me, I didn't go, but he came back and told me that was the best week of his life. So, but I basically like the idea about the Wisdom Accelerator program that Marcelo was mentioning, because I really think, like in our case, we live in Singapore and my son goes to public school. The education system in Singapore is excellent, but in my opinion, it tips one way. It's very academic and everyone is reaching the same goal. So there's not a lot of exposure, and a lot of people here are behaving the same way. So by exposing them and by pairing them with other teenagers, especially the ones who are very motivated to do a lot of things, I think that triple, quadruple, it has like a lot of effect. Like my son, I always encourage him to be to try everything. Basically, I shared with Marcelo earlier that when he was young, he joined ballet, he joined kung fu, he joined art class, he joined dances. He basically tried everything. Sometimes he will last for like a month and he said that, oh, this is not for me. So I said, that's fine, but as long as you try. So I think if you put a lot of teenagers who are thinking and behaving the same way, and they feel safe because this is their same age group. There's no nagging mom like myself shouting on their ears. I think you will see a lot of great things. And maybe at start, the things aren't great, but I really believe in failure. I really believe that you must fail and you must learn from failure. That's what makes you great. That's how you actually acquire wisdom. Because if your road is smooth all the way, there is no way you can be wiser. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, so any questions? Thanks for that, Ineke. So great to have your
No
feedback.
Worries.
Hi, Marcelo. Just a quick question. Yeah, just a quick question. So today the Way program, how do you source the students that get accepted to the program?
Well, the first two events, we actually had 3 events. One was a strategic discussion, so the group was really small. The 2 events in Davos, they were basically referrals. Right? I'll post on Facebook, I'll one-to-one tell friends, LinkedIn as well. And because the number of places is really limited, Davos during the World Economic Forum is a nightmare in terms of accommodation. Everybody wants to be there. And even if I didn't have that constraint, I wouldn't want to have a group with more than 20 kids, because I want them to bond. I want them to have a chance to talk to everyone else. And of course, you have the logistics of having more kids than that, and the parents have to come as well. So the sourcing is complicated for the live events in the sense that not only the teenager needs to take a week off from school, because in the end of January, everybody around the planet is going to school. It's not holidays anywhere that I know. But the parent, or at least the chaperone, needs to take the time off. Now, the other element in terms of, oh, you could do marketing and get Facebook words, and even as a nonprofit, if you had the budget to do that, that could be a possibility. But because I only have 20 spots, if all of a sudden I have a marketing outreach and I have 1,000 kids saying, hey, no, I can take a week off and I can come with my mom or dad, all of a sudden I'm going to have 980 disappointed kids. And I don't have anything else to give to them at this point in time. So the shift to the virtual event, which is what we're planning to do next at the end of this month, we're going to experiment with a couple of different possibilities to make sure that the fun element is there, the learn element is there, and also the doing element is there as well, so with follow-up projects. That allows us to have an outreach that is much more powerful. And if I have something that I can offer to 1,000 kids and they gain value from this, I am in a much better position from the 1,000 that joined the virtual event to say, hey, these are the 20 that really showed a level of enthusiasm and commitment and achievement that gets them to the short list to join a live event. When you're planning to do one in New York as well, I don't think this year is going to happen, so maybe it's going to be a virtual one. And the event that we had for Asia was in Singapore. So the idea is that every 4 months we have a major live event once we go back into this new normal. And in the meantime, we just do virtual, and the answer to your question is that the virtual events would be the way that we will start using to source the participants for the real life ones. But I don't know if the next speaker is here, because already the cutoff point, like 2:30. So if you are the next speaker, please do let us know. I can't see from the list, so who's the co-host of the next one?
The next one is Evgeny Kuris.
Doesn't look like
they're here yet.
Yeah. Okay, so any additional questions until the next one comes? Or just post the link to the Wisdom Accelerator here in case you guys want to check it out.
Great. Just one comment. I really love the name Wisdom, and because particularly, I mean, that's one thing that young people are normally criticized for. So they're like, oh, you're young people, why should you have like a voice? You don't lack the wisdom as like the old people do. So I really like the name. It's very spot on, because you're actually giving these young people the opportunity to get wisdom from others.
It's actually a joke with the particle accelerator, right? If my daughter can have a job at CERN in less than 24 hours. It was like 16 hours after she mentioned she liked particle physics, she had the job offer to work at CERN. And I thought, well, no, the particle accelerator and accelerating wisdom, they seem to combine quite well. And it creates a nice narrative. But that's kind of where it comes from. And also, I wanted to have an acronym that made sense. So this is why Wisdom Accelerator for Youth grammatically sounds a bit odd, but that was the best I could come up with. And Wei in Chinese translates as Tao. So Taoism is pretty much finding your way. And there are lots of symbols behind what we do, because symbols just work. It's easier for you to remember something that's symbolic. Yeah, especially with teens, right? Easier things for them to grasp.
Yeah. True. And just on the same topic, like I encourage everyone to check out like a school called the Brightworks School in San Francisco. They focus on like reimagining education. So going back to what Ineke was saying, that the conventional ways of teaching, you know, it's I think education systems around the world are somewhat broken, and they really need like a big nudge. So the way Brightworks School does is what they talk about is they're like the teachers are collaborators, and then the students have like a very strong say in what they want to learn. So they go to this campus, and then you know they choose what to work on. Like if they want to learn piano, they have a piano there. They want to learn, you know, woodworking, they have the chance to do that. So it's very like fluid, and the students have very much like it's very autonomous. So the students choose their own educational path, and I think this is how, you know, the systems should change. But until we reach that, I think there's so much value in having these complementary programs, I would say, like Way, to really, you know, help youth get to the next level and really unleash their potential. So yeah, I mean, I'm totally, I totally see the value of these programs. And I also have a brief experience. A few years ago, I ran a small event, which is like a 2-day program, where I brought in high school students, so the age of 15 to 17. And basically it was a business plan competition, but it was centered around the Sustainable Development Goals. So basically they had to come in, and then they had to get together in groups, and each group had to come up with a social enterprise idea that tackles one of the UN SDGs. And honestly, like these kids really blew my my expectations were, you know, like that they're gonna come up with okay ideas, but honestly they were like brilliant. You know, there was like 2-3 groups that they were so good that I had to, you know, like I made sure that they had a chance to showcase their idea at an entrepreneurship event that was happening around the same time. So definitely, I think if you give these teenagers the chance, you will definitely be very, you know, surprised at the results that you get. You just need to give them a platform.
Yeah, the one thing that is really important, again, from the experience with my daughter, is that she started doing some crazy Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle stuff when she was 12. I took her cave diving in Brazil because I used to do rock climbing when I was her age. And that was really, really challenging. Literally, she was hanging from a rope, the height equivalent to a 30-story high building, like 90 meters from the bottom of the cave. And she, of course, she wasn't very happy when she saw how deep the place was. But I managed to logically talk through her fear, and she managed to control her emotions enough to say, this is a great opportunity and I don't want to miss. And I feel comfortable because my dad has been doing this for 10 years. We're going down with the guy who discovered the cave, and it looks amazing. And once I realized that she was capable of facing her rawest emotions, like this deep fear of heights, and the cave on top of that is dark, and you can only see this little platform floating at the bottom, and she managed to go over that. That's when it clicked in me, and this is 5 years ago. Like, wow, how can I get her to those situations that will take her to a safe edge that allows her to understand what happens once you reach that edge. And the first thing that she did, she was 14, was to speak a kind of a wisdom accelerator sort of a trial, was to speak at this big symposium in Oman in front of 500 people. She just read a very short speech that I prepared for her. I was the one organizing the conference. I actually needed to have an additional speaker for a panel called Future Opportunities. I thought, she speaks English really well. She has been following what I'm doing. I can leverage the opportunity for her to experience something new and challenging. And if she fails, that's fine. I mean, no one in that room, enormous hall, would criticize her, because it's so brave for a 14-year-old to go on stage and try. So the cost of failure is minimized when you're a teenager. People are just very, very impressed that you tried. And if you do something like that at such a young age, it stays with you forever. As in, when she's 100 years old, or maybe they'll never die anymore. No, once they start doing all the the biohacking stuff, she will remember that. And she'll be able to say, when I was 14, I was reading a speech in front of 500 people. So I think it's really important for teenagers around the world with that level of motivation to be given the opportunity to fail at the lowest possible cost. And she did quite well. It was read for 2 minutes from a piece of paper, sat there for another 10 minutes while the other speakers in the panel, they were making comments and, oh, when I was a teenager, I used to do this. And it was actually very successful. So she was the absolute perfect person to talk about future opportunities, being so young, and then having all the older people saying, well, now that we have the showcase here, this is my professional perspective on how I can make sure that young people can have those opportunities as early as possible. And you end up in a kind of situation where it doesn't have to be something big. It doesn't have to be this huge conference. One of my suggestions is, she's my co-founder of Wisdom Accelerator, so she's not really doing much because of school and stuff, but it is an association, a nonprofit. No, I can sign all the papers, the bank accounts, and contracts to have a web server and all that. But she became the co-founder of an association focused on teenager education when she was 15. What's preventing parents everywhere around the world? And in fact, I did mention, I believe, to Neka as well, that maybe she can create an association with her son, and then whatever his passion is right now, they give the structure, right? So they'll sign the documents, open the bank account and everything else, but they just give you a conduit to that passion. That is a corporate entity. Literally, you can sign contracts. You can learn how to revise the contracts with your supplier. There's, selling you ice cream or renting equipment for you to have your little stand. But all of a sudden, they are learning skills that are going to be useful for life. And they can always say that, well, when I was 15, I started a company selling bubble tea. As in, when I was 14, I was selling software with a friend of mine. We put an advertisement in the local newspaper, people just making phone calls on a landline. We just go there with the magnetic tapes, and we started selling the stuff. And it was not my initiative. It was just my friend who was really entrepreneurial. And as we were best friends, like, hey, we would like to do this with me. So I end up being in a situation where I knew that it was not something that I wanted to do for life, but I knew for sure. I tried when I was 14. And I think that more teenagers should be given this opportunity. They should be told that this is possible, and it's not even difficult. In the case of establishing an association in Switzerland, it's free. You just write the statutes, you sign it, and all of a sudden you have a legal entity. You just need to learn, right? You need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a program, again, I don't know if anyone has comments, or I don't think the speaker has come for the next session. But just one last comment. There's one very nice program. I don't recall where it was. Maybe it's in Dubai. But basically, they do these basically rotations where they bring in very high potential youth, but they're mainly let's say 20, 21, and they let them be a CEO of a company for 1 day.
I think now we have to call it a wrap. So thanks so much for joining. Send me a message. It's basically marcelo@wisdomaccelerator.org. I'll put it here as well. And enjoy the next session.
All right. Thank you. Take care.